So, how did the office of Prime Minister of England emerge in 1721? When King George first asked Walpole to be the first Lord of the Treasury and Chancellor of the Exchequer in April 1721, no one at that time saw it as a major constitutional innovation, and none of them used the term Prime Minister. Some see the office of Prime Minister dating back even long back before 1721. In the 16th century, Thomas Wolsey and Thomas Cromwell under Henry VIII and William and Robert Cecil under Elizabeth I had some of the attributes of the Prime Minister as the job emerged. But they were different from the Prime Minister because their power rested wholly upon the monarch. But the office of the Prime Minister emerged after 1721, derived its authority from the Parliament and little bit from the monarch. A series of Acts of Parliament after 1689 were all important in ensuring that Britain was to develop a constitutional rather than absolute monarch. With Parliament to meet every year, elections initially every 3 years and then 7 years, and the King depended upon Parliament for revenue. This required the King to have a full figure in Parliament who he could trust to ensure his legislation and financial bills passed. If it had not been for the infamous South Sea bubble in 1720 and 21, when the collapse of the South Sea Company stocks ruined thousands of investors, the office of Prime Minister might still not have been emerged. George I, who became king in 1714, was heavily implicated in this affair, and King turned to Robert Walpole to stabilize the country. A moment of high peril came in 1727 when King George I was succeeded by his son George II, who turned to one of Walpole's rivals, Spencer Compton. But he proved incapable of commanding Parliament, so George II once again turned back to Walpole. When Walpole was ousted from office in 1742, the position was more firmly embedded in the Constitution because he remained Prime Minister for 21 years. Still the longest spell in the hot seat for the British Prime Minister. But it was to be another 40 years and the arrival of William Pitt the Younger as Prime Minister before the office truly stabilized. It is to a large extent thanks to Pitt's many qualities as a leader that the position of the Prime Minister has survived its first 300 years. When George III became the king, he wanted authority from the Parliament back. It was seen clearly in the American War of Independence when it was seen that it was the king and not the Prime Minister Lord North who drove the aggressive policy forward, but still lost 13 colonies of America. It was a big blow not just to the Britain, but to the George III himself, who seriously considered abdicating. King George III set out to dominate his prime ministers, but the loss of America put Prime Minister William Pitt in the hot seat, and there was no going back. For the next serious military conflict, the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, it was William Pitt in the driving seat and not George. The king's bouts and mental illness and increasing fatigue and his withdrawal from the office in 1811 was another key moment in the emergence of the Prime Minister. The growing influence and the political parties from the 1830s further consolidated the position of the Prime Minister as a political head of their party. Prime Ministers of England have now, for much of the office's 300-year history, been vastly overworked, with little time for Parliament, visiting the nations and meeting people. Now monarchy is just old tradition to have around, with no real action. The actual power is within the hand of Prime Minister. Thanks.